What would you do if you discovered your deepest betrayal had been laid bare, not through confrontation, but through a carefully orchestrated plan designed to make you face the truth? In the quiet coastal town of Seabrook, where secrets are buried beneath layers of picturesque charm, Kylie Harrison fights not only for her life against an unforgiving illness but also to expose the man who vowed to stand by her. With a mirror that reveals more than reflection and a letter that cuts deeper than any blade, Kylie's final act is one of both vengeance and redemption. But will it awaken the man she once loved, or destroy him completely? It was a crisp autumn morning in the small coastal town of Seabrook, where Kylie Harrison had lived her entire life. The once vibrant woman now lay frail and weakened by aggressive cancer that had taken hold of her body with unrelenting ferocity. Diagnosed just 8 months prior, Kylie had been undergoing grueling chemotherapy sessions at St. Mary's Hospital, a modest but respected medical facility nestled along the cliffs overlooking the restless sea. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly, leaving her hollowed features framed by colourful scarves gifted to her by her younger sister, Olivia. At 34, Kylie's life had become an endless cycle of hospital visits, treatments, and quiet despair. Louis, her husband of 15 years, had initially promised to stand by her side through every step of this harrowing journey. Yet as the weeks turned into months, his presence began to wane. On this particular Thursday afternoon, Kylie sat propped up against her pillows in room 214, absently touching the diamond wedding ring that now hung loosely on her thin finger. Louis had called earlier with yet another excuse, this time citing an urgent meeting with investors for a new real estate project he was spearheading. It was the fourth such excuse that month, and each one left Kylie feeling increasingly isolated. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the vertical blinds, casting striped shadows across her bed. The rhythmic beeping of her heart monitor filled the silence until it was interrupted by the soft knock of Dr. Rachel Chen, Kylie's oncologist. "Kylie," Dr. Chen began gently, her clipboard in hand, "we need to talk about your latest test results." Before she could continue, rapid footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Helen burst into the room, her designer handbag swinging wildly. "I'm here," she exclaimed breathlessly. "Sorry I'm late. The traffic on Ocean Drive was insane." Dr. Chen closed the door behind her and pulled up a chair, her expression carefully neutral. "Your cancer has spread more aggressively than we anticipated," as she explained, her voice steady but compassionate. "The experimental treatment isn't working as we'd hoped." Helen gripped Kylie's hand tightly, tears welling in her eyes, while Kylie listened with eerie calmness. "How long?" she asked simply, her voice devoid of emotion. Dr. Chen hesitated before replying, 3 to 4 months at most, without aggressive intervention. After the doctor left, Helen turned to her sister, her face streaked with tears. "We need to call Louis. He should have been here for this." Kylie managed a bitter smile. "He's busy. Liv. Important meetings. You know how it is." Olivia's voice rose sharply. "He's your husband, for God's sake. And what about Aunt Martha's inheritance? Where has all that money gone?" Kylie sighed, though a flicker of unease crossed her face. The inheritance from their late aunt had been substantial, nearly $5 million, and Louis had insisted on managing it, claiming his expertise in finance made him better suited for the task. Lately, however, Kylie had begun to question some of his investment decisions. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Julia Powell, one of the newer nurses on the floor, entered with Kylie's medication. Tall and striking, with perfectly styled dark hair and expensive-looking scrubs, Julia had only been working at St. Mary's for a few months. As she administered the medication, Kylie suddenly felt a wave of nausea unlike anything she'd experienced before. Rushing to the bathroom, she barely made it in time, with Helen holding her hair back. "This is new," Helen remarked worriedly. "Should we call Dr. Chen back?" But Kylie froze, a strange expression crossing her face. "What's today's date?" She whispered. "October 15th, Helen replied, confused. "Why?" Kylie's hands began to tremble. "I'm late, very late." Realization dawned on Olivia's face. "Oh my God, are you saying?" Kylie cut her off, her voice trembling. "I need a pregnancy test." An hour later, Kylie stared at the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, disbelief washing over her. Tears streamed down her face as Helen hugged her tightly. "This is incredible, Helen whispered. "A miracle." But Kylie's joy was tinged with fear. "The doctors said the chemo would make this impossible," as she murmured. "What if something goes wrong?" Later that day, Kylie finally worked up the courage to call Louis. The phone rang 5 times before going to voicemail. She tried again and again, but on the 4th attempt, he finally answered, sounding irritated. "Kylie, I'm in the middle of something important." "What is it?" Kylie's voice quivered. "Louis, I need you to come to the hospital. There's something we need to discuss, something important." There was a pause, followed by muffled voices in the background. "Can't it wait until tomorrow? I'm closing a major deal here." Kylie's heart sank. "No, it can't wait, Louis." But before she could say more, he interrupted. "Listen, honey, I've got to go. The clients are waiting. I'll try to stop by tomorrow, okay?" The line went dead. Olivia, who had been pretending not to listen, could no longer contain herself. "That's it. I'm hiring a private investigator." Kylie hesitated but didn't argue. Deep down, she suspected Helen might be right. The way Louis had been acting lately, the missing money from their accounts, the constant excuses, something wasn't adding up. And then there was Julia, the new nurse, who always seemed to hover nearby when Louis visited. Something about her calculating gaze sent chills down Kylie's spine. 2 days later, Helen stormed into Kylie's hospital room, her face flushed with anger. Clutching a manila envelope, she said, "You need to see this." Inside were dozens of photographs, Louis and Julia at expensive restaurants, entering a luxury apartment building, shopping at Tiffany's. But it was the last photo that made Kylie's blood run cold. Louis and Julia kissing passionately outside St. Mary's Hospital, right under Kylie's window. "There's more," Helen added grimly, pulling out bank statements and property records. "He's been liquidating your inheritance, nearly $4 million, He's been spending it on her, jewelry, a penthouse, trips. And get this, Julia isn't even a real nurse. She got the job using fake credentials, probably to keep an eye on you." Kylie stared at the evidence of her husband's betrayal, a cold clarity settling over her. Along with the pain came something else, a fierce determination. How long had this been going on? According to the private investigator, at least 6 months. They had met at a bar shortly after Kylie's diagnosis. Julia knew exactly who Louis was, who Kylie was, and about Aunt Martha's money. This betrayal had been calculated. That night, as Kylie lay awake in her hospital bed, she began to plan. The baby inside her might not survive. She might not survive. But she would make damn sure Louis Harrison remembered her until the day he died. 3 days after discovering the photographs, Kylie lost the baby. The stress and her weakened body couldn't sustain the tiny life within her. She didn't tell Louis about the miscarriage. She didn't tell him anything anymore. Julia continued to work her shifts, apparently unaware that Kylie knew everything. One particularly bold afternoon, Julia attempted to make conversation while changing Kylie's for. Your husband seems so devoted, as she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. It must be hard for him, seeing you like this. Kylie looked directly into Julia's eyes, her gaze steady. Yes, Louis has always been good at playing devoted. Tell me, Julia, do you like the emerald necklace he bought you? The one from Tiffany's? The 4-bag slipped from Julia's hands, splashing fluid across the floor. Her perfectly composed facade cracked for just a moment, revealing the calculating creature beneath. I don't know what you're talking about, as she stammered, quickly gathering her composure. No? Kylie's voice was soft but cutting. That's strange, because I have a lovely photograph of you wearing it while you kissed my husband outside this very hospital. Green really does suit you. Julia fled the room, leaving the 4 dripping onto the floor. She never returned to Kylie's floor after that day, calling in sick and eventually resigning her position. As Kylie's condition worsened, she focused all her remaining energy on finalizing her plans. With the help of Mr. Thompson, her aunt's old lawyer, she arranged for new documents to be drawn up, modified her will, and set a series of events into motion that would unfold after her death. Louis continued his pattern of brief, distracted visits, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He still hadn't noticed her pregnancy, or the miscarriage. Not that it mattered now. That night, as Kylie lay awake in her hospital bed, she began to formulate her plan. The baby she had lost weighed heavily on her heart, but she refused to let grief consume her. Instead, she channeled her emotions into action. Early the next morning, she called Mr. Thompson, her aunt's old lawyer, who had always held a soft spot for her. His voice softened when he heard hers on the line. Kylie, my dear, how are you holding up? I need your help, as she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Over the course of several calls, Kylie outlined her wishes. She wanted her remaining inheritance, what little hadn't already been squandered by Louis, to be donated to charity. Specifically, she chose organizations close to her heart, the Seabrook Cancer Center, a local women's shelter, and a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing higher education. But there was more. Kylie requested 2 symbolic items be left for Louis, a letter detailing everything she knew about his betrayal, and an antique mirror that had been passed down through generations of women in her family. It belonged to my grandmother, Kylie explained to Mr. Thompson during one of their meetings. She used it to face her truths, both beautiful and ugly. Now, it's Louis's turn. Mr. Thompson hesitated, his kind eyes filled with concern. Are you sure about this, Kylie? Once these arrangements are made, there's no going back. I'm sure, as she replied firmly. Sometimes, the cruelest punishment isn't taking everything away from someone, it's forcing them to look at themselves and truly see what they've become. The mirror arrived at the hospital 2 days later, wrapped carefully in brown paper and tied with twine. Kylie unwrapped it slowly, running her fingers over the ornate silver frame. It was an exquisite piece, its surface slightly worn from years of use, yet still capable of reflecting the truth without mercy. As she gazed into it, she thought of the women who had come before her, her grandmother, who had faced poverty and loss with unyielding strength, her mother, who had raised 2 daughters alone after their father's death, and now herself, battling cancer and betrayal with equal resolve. This will be my gift to him, Kylie murmured to Olivia, who stood nearby, watching her sister with a mixture of admiration and worry. Not a punishment. Live. A chance to see himself clearly for the first time. Helen frowned. And if he doesn't? If he just blames everyone else, like he always does? Then that's his choice, Kylie said softly. But I'll have done everything I can to give him the tools to change. Whether he uses them is up to him. As Kylie finalized her plans, a new complication arose, one that added an element of suspense and danger to her already precarious situation. One afternoon, while Helen was fetching coffee from the cafeteria, Julia entered Kylie's room under the pretense of administering medication. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced by something colder, more calculating. "I know you've figured it out," Julia said, her voice low and menacing. "About me and Louis. About the money." Kylie met her gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. "And I suppose you're here to threaten me? To make sure I don't say anything?" Julia smirked, leaning closer. "Let's just say it would be in your best interest to keep quiet. You're dying anyway, aren't you? Why cause trouble for Louis? He's happy now. Happier than he ever was with you." For a moment, Kylie felt a flicker of doubt. What if Julia carried out her threat? What if Louis found a way to cover his tracks and escape accountability? But then she remembered the mirror, sitting safely in her bedside drawer, and the meticulous plan she had put in place with Mr. Thompson. She smiled faintly, a glimmer of triumph in her eyes. "You're right," Kylie said calmly. "I'm dying. But some legacies live on long after we're gone. And trust me, Julia, you won't like the one I'm leaving behind." Julia's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, straightening up and smoothing her scrubs. "We'll see," she muttered before exiting the room, leaving Kylie alone with her thoughts. In the weeks that followed, Kylie worked tirelessly with Mr. Thompson to ensure every detail of her plan was perfect. She drafted the letter to Louis, pouring her heart into each word. It wasn't just a recounting of his betrayal, it was a plea for self-reflection, a reminder of the man he could still become if he chose to confront his mistakes. "To my dearest Louis," she wrote, "by the time you read this, I will be gone, and you will be discovering that your carefully laid plans have crumbled to dust. Yes, I knew about Julia. I knew about the penthouse, the jewelry, the vacations. I knew everything. I also knew about the baby, our baby, that I lost while you were buying emeralds for your mistress. The child you never knew about because you were too busy building a new life on the foundation of my death to notice that I was carrying your child." She paused, tears blurring her vision, but she forced herself to continue. "This letter isn't about punishment, Louis. It's about reflection. The mirror I've left you is very special to me. It belonged to my grandmother, who gave it to my mother, who gave it to me. It has seen 3 generations of women in my family face their truths, both beautiful and ugly. Now it's your turn. Every morning when you wake up, I want you to look into this mirror, really look. See the man who could leave his dying wife alone in a hospital while he romanced a fake nurse. See the man who could spend his wife's inheritance on trinkets for his mistress while she fought for her life. See the man who lost the chance to be a father because he was too selfish to be a husband. The mirror will never lie to you, Louis, even though you've spent your entire life lying to yourself." As December gave way to January, Kylie's condition worsened dramatically. The cancer spread faster than anyone had anticipated, accelerated by the stress of the miscarriage and her discontinued treatments. Louis, seemingly oblivious to the change in his wife's demeanor, continued his sporadic visits. If he noticed that Julia no longer worked at the hospital, he never mentioned it. He was too preoccupied with his phone, his important meetings, and the life he was building on the foundation of his wife's suffering. What he didn't know was that Kylie had already set the wheels in motion for her final act. The papers were signed, the arrangements were made, and the trap was set. All that remained was for Kylie to close her eyes one last time. On a bitterly cold January morning, as snow began to fall outside her hospital window, Kylie Harrison smiled faintly, thinking of the storm that would soon engulf her husband's carefully constructed world of lies. The mirror sat wrapped in her bedside drawer, waiting for its moment to reflect the truth back at the man who had betrayed her. Little did Louis know, The consequences of his actions were about to catch up with him in ways he could never have imagined. As the final days of December approached, the snow continued to fall over Seabrook, blanketing the coastal town in a quiet stillness that mirrored Kylie Harrison's fragile state. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly, the cancer spreading faster than even Dr. Chen had anticipated. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks lit up the night sky over the Atlantic Ocean, Kylie passed away peacefully in her sleep, holding Olivia's hand. The antique mirror, wrapped carefully in its drawer, stood as a silent witness to her final moments. The news of Kylie's death reached Louis 2 days later. He and Julia were vacationing in a luxurious villa on the Maldives, their escape funded by the last remnants of Kylie's inheritance. When Helen called, her voice was cold and clipped, devoid of any emotion. "She's gone," as she said flatly. "The funeral is in 3 days. Don't bother coming if you're too busy with your new life." Louis felt a pang of guilt but quickly pushed it aside. After all, he reasoned, Kylie was gone now, and there was nothing left to hold him back from the future he'd been building with Julia. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something was terribly wrong, something beyond the weight of Kylie's passing. The funeral was held at St. Mary's Cathedral, a grand yet solemn affair that Kylie had meticulously planned during her final weeks. She had chosen every detail, the white roses adorning her casket, the soft strains of classical music playing in the background, and even the order of speakers. Friends, family, and colleagues filled the pews, many visibly moved by the loss of such a kind and resilient woman. Louis arrived dressed in an expensive black suit, his demeanor polished and practiced. To the outside world, he played the role of the grieving husband perfectly. He dabbed at his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, accepted condolences with a well-rehearsed look of devastation, and delivered a brief eulogy that brought tears to the eyes of several elderly relatives. "Kylie was the love of my life," he declared, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "She fought so bravely, and I was with her every step of the way." But Olivia, sitting in the front row with clenched fists, saw through the facade. Beside her, Mr. Thompson wore an expression that hovered between pity and disdain. In his lap rested a leather-bound folder containing the documents that would soon shatter Louis's carefully constructed reality. Julia sat several rows back, attempting to blend into the crowd. She had insisted on attending, believing it might be her chance to solidify her place in Louis's life. But as she glanced around the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her every move. 3 days after the funeral, Louis received a call from Mr. Thompson's office requesting his presence for the reading of Kylie's will. The lawyer's secretary emphasized that he should come alone, no guests or legal representation required. Louis arrived dressed in another tailored suit, this one navy blue with subtle pinstripes, exuding confidence. He carried himself as though expecting to inherit millions, unaware that his world was about to collapse. Julia waited across the street at a coffee shop, scrolling through social media and sipping an overpriced latte. She had no idea what awaited them both. Inside the conference room, Mr. Thompson greeted Louis with a polite but distant nod. Helen was already seated, along with a court reporter and a videographer, another of Kylie's specific requests. "Before we begin," Mr. Thompson said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, Mrs. Harrison left explicit instructions that this proceeding be recorded in its entirety. "Do you have any objections?" Louis waved dismissively. "Of course not. Let's get on with it." Mr. Thompson opened an elegant leather folder and began to read. At first, the document seemed routine, small bequests to cousins, friends, and charitable organizations. But then came the bombshell. "Regarding the remainder of my estate, including all funds inherited from my late Aunt Martha Harrison, all properties purchased with said funds, and all investments made thereof, I hereby direct that these assets, valued at approximately $4 million, be divided equally among the following charitable organizations: the Seabrook Cancer Center, Mount Sinai Hospital's Oncology Research Department, and the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Louis froze, his face draining of color. This can't be real, he stammered, rising from his chair. That money was meant for me. I'm her husband. Please sit down, Mr. Harrison, Mr. Thompson said calmly. There's more. Louis sank back into his seat, trembling. The lawyer continued, his tone almost theatrical. To my husband, Louis Alexander Harrison, I leave 2 items. First, this letter, to be read immediately. He handed Louis a cream-colored envelope. And second, Helen reached under the table and produced a familiar wrapped package. This mirror. Louis stared at the antique mirror as Helen placed it before him, its silver frame gleaming under the office lights. With shaking hands, he opened Kylie's letter and began to read aloud, per Mr. Thompson's instruction. My dearest Louis, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and you will be discovering that your carefully laid plans have crumbled to dust. Yes, I knew about Julia. I knew about the penthouse, the jewelry, the trips. I knew everything. I also knew about the baby, our baby, that I lost while you were buying emeralds for your mistress. The child you never knew about because you were too busy building a new life on the foundation of my death to notice that I was carrying your child. But this letter isn't about punishment, Louis. It's about reflection. The mirror I've left you is very special to me. It belonged to my grandmother, who gave it to my mother, who gave it to me. It has seen 3 generations of women in my family face their truths, both beautiful and ugly. Now it's your turn. Every morning when you wake up, I want you to look into this mirror, really look. See the man who could leave his dying wife alone in a hospital while he romanced a fake nurse. See the man who could spend his wife's inheritance on trinkets for his mistress while she fought for her life. See the man who lost the chance to be a father because he was too selfish to be a husband. The mirror will never lie to you, Louis, even though you've spent your entire life lying to yourself. And maybe, just maybe, one day you'll look into it and finally see yourself the way I saw you in the end. Don't bother looking for the money. It's gone. Don't bother trying to contest the will. Mr. Thompson has made it ironclad. Don't bother running to Julia. She'll be gone too, once she realizes there's nothing left for her to take. All you have now is your reflection, Louis. I hope you learn to live with it. With all the love I once had. Kylie. The silence that followed was absolute. Louis stared at the letter, then at the mirror, his face a mask of horror as the full implications of his situation sank in. This is impossible, he whispered. It's quite possible, Mr. Thompson replied. In fact, the authorities are already seizing the penthouse and freezing your accounts. Miss Powell has been served with eviction papers, and the police are investigating her fraudulent nursing credentials. Louis's phone buzzed incessantly on the table. Glancing at it, he saw a series of increasingly frantic messages from Julia. Louis, there are people at the penthouse with papers. They're saying we have to leave immediately. What's happening? Where are you? The final message read simply, don't bother quarreling. I'm done. You're not worth the fraud charges. As the reality of his predicament set in, Louis slumped in his chair, his expensive suit suddenly seeming to hang loose on his frame. The videographer captured every moment, documenting the unraveling of a man who had built his life on lies. 2 months after Kylie's death, Louis found himself living in a small studio apartment in Queens, a far cry from the luxury penthouse he'd shared with Julia. The antique mirror hung on the wall opposite his bed, exactly where Kylie had intended it, visible the moment he woke up and the last thing he saw before sleeping. His professional life had imploded spectacularly. Word of his betrayal spread quickly through Seabrook's tight-knit community. Former clients distanced themselves, business partners dissolved their associations, and his once golden reputation was irreparably tarnished. Today, he prepared for his first job interview in 20 years, not for a prestigious position in real estate development, but for an entry-level sales role at a modest property management firm in Brooklyn. Before leaving, Louis did what he'd done every morning since receiving Kylie's letter. He stood before the mirror and really looked at himself. "What do you see?" he whispered, echoing the question his court-mandated therapist had taught him to ask. The reflection stared back, a man in his early 40s, graying at the temples, lines etched deeply around his mouth and eyes. But it was the eyes themselves that had changed the most. The arrogant gleam was gone, replaced by something darker, more haunted. His phone buzzed, a text from his younger sister Katie. "Don't forget to eat something before the interview. And Louis, remember what Dr. Patterson said about owning your story." Dr. Patterson, his therapist, had been working with him on accountability. No more excuses, no more deflections, no more carefully crafted narratives to hide behind. Just the raw, ugly truth of what he'd done. The subway ride to Brooklyn was a humbling experience for a man who had once refused to travel anywhere without his private car service. He found himself studying his fellow passengers, wondering about their stories, their struggles, their losses, things he had never considered before. At the property management office, Louis met Tom Chen, the company owner, Maria Rodriguez, the HR director, and, to his surprise, John Turner, a former client he'd worked with in his previous life. When asked why he was there, Louis took a deep breath and laid out every ugly detail of his downfall. He described his ongoing therapy, his attempts to make amends, and his daily struggles with the mirror that forced him to face himself. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Louis concluded. "I don't deserve it. What I'm asking for is a chance to start over, to be someone different than the man I see in that mirror every morning." After the interview, Louis walked along the Brooklyn waterfront, watching Manhattan's skyline sparkle in the winter sunlight. His phone buzzed with a message from Tom Chen. "We need to discuss some additional details. Can you come back tomorrow?" That evening, as Louis sat in his studio apartment eating takeout from the Chinese restaurant downstairs, he pulled out his therapy journal. Dr. Patterson had insisted he document his journey, not for anyone else to read, but as another form of reflection. Day 67 without Kylie, he wrote. "I dreamed about her last night, not the Kylie from the end, thin and angry and knowing everything, but the Kylie from the beginning, the one who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and believed in me more than I deserved. In the dream, she was holding our baby, the one we lost, the one I never knew about until it was too late. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with those eyes that always saw right through me, even when I couldn't see myself." A knock at his door interrupted his writing. When he opened it, he found Helen standing there, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Katie told me about your interview," she said without preamble. "I thought you should have these." She thrust a box into his hands and turned to leave. "Olivia, wait." Louis called after her. "I know it doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She paused, not turning around. "You're right. It doesn't mean anything. But Kylie would want you to have those things. She saved everything, you know. Every movie ticket, every birthday card, every stupid little note you ever wrote her. She believed in you until the end. That was her tragedy." After Helen left, Louis opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, letters, and small mementos from his life with Kylie. At the bottom lay a diary, Kylie's diary from her time in the hospital. He read through it all night, tears streaming down his face as he discovered the wife he'd never truly known. She wrote about her hopes for the baby, her fears about death, and her growing suspicions about his betrayal. The final entry was dated just 3 days before her death. Dear Louis, by the time anyone reads this, I'll be gone. The mirror I'm leaving you isn't just about punishment, though God knows you deserve that. It's about hope. Hope that somewhere inside the man who could betray me so completely is still the man I fell in love with. The man who used to bring me coffee in bed and dance with me in the kitchen. The man who promised to love me in sickness and in health. I'm not leaving you the mirror to torture you, Louis. I'm leaving it to save you. Because sometimes, we need to lose everything to find ourselves again. Love always. Kylie. 1 year after Kylie's death, Louis stood in front of the mirror in his studio apartment, adjusting the tie on his newly purchased suit. It wasn't designer label anymore. Those days were long gone, but it was clean and professional, appropriate for the event ahead. Today marked the grand opening of the Kylie Harrison Memorial Wing at Mount Sinai Hospital, funded by the money she'd left to the oncology department. Louis had been invited not as a guest of honor, but as a cautionary tale. Part of his therapy and redemption journey had involved speaking to medical ethics classes about patient vulnerability and the betrayal of trust. When the hospital board heard about his presentations, they decided his story should be part of the opening ceremony. As he prepared to speak, Louis pulled out the worn ultrasound photo he always carried now. He'd added something else to it, the last photo ever taken of Kylie, smiling weakly from her hospital bed, her eyes still somehow full of light. My name is Louis Harrison, he began, his voice steady. And I am here today not as a success story but as a warning. He spoke of his betrayal, his greed, and the family he had lost. He shared Kylie's final gift, the mirror, and explained how it had become less of a punishment and more of a daily reminder. Every morning, I look in Kylie's mirror before I leave for work. Every evening, I look in it again before I go to bed. And slowly, very slowly, I'm starting to see something different in my reflection. Not redemption, because I don't deserve that, but maybe, just maybe, something like understanding. As he stepped away from the podium, Louis noticed movement in the audience. Julia had slipped into the back of the auditorium. She looked older, more worn, but somehow more authentic than she had during their affair. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away. After the ceremony, Julia approached him. I heard you were working in Brooklyn now, she said quietly. Property management, entry-level, he replied. She nodded. I'm in New Jersey teaching nursing, legitimate this time. Actually went back to school for it. That's good. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Julia spoke again. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't? No, Louis interrupted firmly. I don't. Because wondering about that means wondering if there was ever a right way to do the wrong thing. There wasn't. Julia nodded again, understanding. The mirror, she said. The one Kylie left you. Do you still have it? It's the first thing I see every morning and the last thing I see every night. Does it help? Louis thought about it for a moment. It doesn't make anything better. It doesn't fix what we did. But it makes sure I never forget. And maybe that's the point. As Julia walked away, Helen approached. Kylie would have appreciated the speech, as she said stiffly. Not for the apology, but for the truth. I don't expect forgiveness, Louis replied. Good, because you're not getting it. She paused. But Kylie believed in second chances, not second chances at what you had, that's gone forever. But second chances at being someone different, someone better. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a key. The house in Connecticut, Ishii explained. The one Kylie loved. I'm selling it. I thought you might want to say goodbye to it first. The drive to the Connecticut house took Louis through winding country roads dusted with early spring snow. It had been nearly 18 months since Kylie's death, and the world had moved on in ways both subtle and profound. Pulling up to the familiar white colonial house, Louis felt a wave of memories wash over him. This had been their weekend retreat, the place where they'd planned to retire someday. Kylie had loved the garden, spending countless hours nurturing her roses and planning future landscaping projects she'd never get to complete. Inside, the house was exactly as they'd left it that last summer before Kylie's diagnosis. Her gardening magazines still sat in a neat stack on the coffee table. Her favorite throw blanket remained draped over the armchair by the window. The air smelled faintly of the lavender sachets she used to make and hide in drawers throughout the house. Upstairs, Louis found himself standing in the doorway of what was supposed to be the nursery. They'd talked about having children for years, always saying a someday, until someday ran out. Now, knowing about the baby they'd lost, the empty room felt like another accusation. In the master bedroom, Louis found Kylie's diary from before her illness. It was different from the hospital diary he now carried with him. This one was full of life, hope, and future plans. The last entry was dated just 3 days before her diagnosis. My dearest Louis, I'm sitting in our bedroom in Connecticut as I write this, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that remind me of our first date. Do you remember? We walked through Central Park as the autumn leaves were turning, and you said the sky looked like it was celebrating with us. You always had a way with words when you wanted to. Today, I found out I'm pregnant, our miracle baby, the one we stopped hoping for years ago. I haven't told you yet. I wanted to find the perfect way to share this news, maybe here in our weekend house, where we've talked so many times about the family we wanted to build. But something's changing between us, isn't it? I feel you pulling away, becoming someone I don't quite recognize. There are moments when I catch you looking at your phone, smiling at messages I'm not supposed to notice. Times when you think I'm sleeping, and you slip out of bed to take calls in the hallway. I tell myself it's work, that you're just stressed about the new development project. I tell myself that 15 years of love and trust can't be wrong. I'm writing this letter because I want to remember this moment, this perfect, hopeful moment, before whatever comes next. Because no matter what happens, I want you to know that I believe in you. Not just the successful businessman you've become, but the man underneath, the man who used to bring me coffee in bed just because, the man who learned to garden because he knew it made me happy, the man who held me through 3 miscarriages and still wanted to try again. That man is still in there, Louis. I have to believe that. Because this baby deserves to know that version of you, the real you, not the person you've been pretending to be lately. If you're reading this, it means something has happened, either something wonderful or something terrible. Either way, I want you to remember who you are. Not who the world thinks you are, or who you think you need to be, but who you are in your heart. I love you, Louis. I love you enough to forgive whatever's coming. I love you enough to believe you'll find your way back to yourself, even if I'm not there to see it. Forever yours. Kylie. Louis sank to the floor, the letter clutched to his chest. Helen watched him, her own tears falling freely now. She never sent it, Helen said quietly. She found out about Julia the next day. Everything changed after that. Why are you giving this to me now? Louis asked, his voice raw. Because Kylie was right about one thing. You did find your way back to yourself. Too late for her, too late for the baby, but maybe not too late for something else. What do you mean? Helen took a deep breath. The Memorial Wing, they're starting a program for families of cancer patients. support groups, counseling resources. They want someone to speak to the families about what not to do, about how to be there for their loved ones. They want you. Louis stared at her in disbelief. Me? After everything I did? Because of everything you did, and everything you've done since. You're living proof of both the worst and best of human nature. She paused. Kylie would want you to do it. Louis pulled out the mirror again, studying his reflection in the fading light. The face that looked back at him was older, sadder, but somehow more real than it had been in years. I'll do it, he said finally. Not for redemption. I don't deserve that. But for the truth. For Kylie. Helen nodded. The house goes on the market next week. But Kylie's garden, I thought maybe you could help maintain it. Not own it, but just keep it alive for her. As they walked through the house one last time, turning off lights and closing doors, Louis stopped in the nursery doorway. Do you think she knew? He asked. When she planned everything, the mirror, the will, do you think she knew I'd eventually understand? Kylie always saw the best in people, Helen replied. Even when they couldn't see it themselves. She touched his arm briefly, the first voluntary contact she'd initiated since Kylie's death. Don't waste her faith in you. Not again. Outside, the snow had started falling again, covering Kylie's dormant garden in a blanket of white. Louis placed the letter carefully in his pocket, next to the ultrasound photo he always carried. The mirror pressed against his heart like a reminder. Goodbye, Kylie, he whispered to the empty house. I'm sorry I couldn't be who you needed me to be when it mattered. But I promise, I swear, I'll be who you always believed I could be. Every day for the rest of my life, I'll look in your mirror and try to see what you saw. As he drove away, the house growing smaller in his rearview mirror, Louis felt something shift inside him, not forgiveness, because he would never forgive himself, not redemption, because that wasn't his to claim, but perhaps something like purpose. A chance to turn his greatest shame into something meaningful, to help others avoid his mistakes, to keep Kylie's legacy alive in ways she might have wished for. The following weekend, Louis returned to Connecticut, not to the house, which was now under contract with buyers, but to the garden Kylie had poured so much of herself into. Armed with gardening gloves, pruning shears, and a thermos of coffee, he spent hours clearing away dead leaves, trimming overgrown bushes, and preparing the soil for spring planting. It was hard work, both physically and emotionally, but each task felt like a step toward redemption. As he worked, memories flooded back, the laughter they'd shared here, the dreams they'd built together, the quiet moments of connection that had once defined their marriage. He found himself talking aloud, as if Kylie were sitting nearby listening. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry I let you down. But I promise, I'll take care of this garden. I'll make sure your spirit lives on here. By mid-afternoon, his hands were blistered and raw, but the garden looked alive again, ready to bloom when warmer weather arrived. Before leaving, he planted a single rose bush in the center of the yard, a variety called Forever Yours. It was a small tribute, but it felt right, as if Kylie herself had chosen it. Over the next few months, Louis threw himself into the work Kylie's legacy had inspired. At the property management firm in Brooklyn, he became known for his dedication and honesty, traits that earned him the trust of colleagues and clients alike. On weekends, he volunteered at the Kylie Harrison Memorial Wing, sharing his story with families navigating the challenges of cancer treatment. His talks weren't easy to deliver. He often choked up recounting the details of his betrayal, but they resonated deeply with those who heard them. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, he would say during these sessions. I'm here to show you what happens when you choose selfishness over love, when you prioritize material wealth over human connection. And I'm here to remind you that no matter how far you fall, it's never too late to start making things right. His words carried weight because they came from a place of genuine remorse. Families began approaching him after the sessions, thanking him for his vulnerability and courage. Some even invited him to join support groups or community events, slowly reintegrating him into a world he thought he'd lost forever. On the anniversary of Kylie's death, Louis sat at his desk with pen and paper, composing a letter he hoped would someday reach the people who needed it most. It was addressed not to any one person, but to anyone struggling to find meaning in their pain. To whoever reads this, he wrote, "If you're holding this letter, chances are you've experienced loss, betrayal, or heartbreak, perhaps all three. You may feel like your world has ended, like there's no way forward. Believe me, I know how that feels. There were days when I thought I'd never recover from the choices I made, the people I hurt, the opportunities one squandered. But here's what I've learned: healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering, and using that memory to create something meaningful. Kylie taught me that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to plant seeds of hope, compassion, and change. She showed me that true love isn't about perfection. It's about effort, presence, and sacrifice. So if you're reading this, I want you to know that you're stronger than you think. That the mistakes you've made don't define you unless you let them. And that somewhere out there, someone believes in you, even if that someone is yourself. Thank you for taking the time to hear my story. Thank you for believing in the possibility of renewal. And thank you for honoring Kylie's memory by living with purpose, kindness, and grace. With gratitude, Louis." He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into an envelope, adding it to a growing collection he planned to donate to the Memorial Wings Resource Library. Each letter was a testament to the lessons he'd learned and the progress he'd made, a reminder that Kylie's influence extended far beyond her lifetime. Years later, when Louis finally passed away at the age of 72, his obituary included a simple yet powerful sentence: "He spent his life proving that it's never too late to become the person you were always meant to be." Beneath it was a photograph of him standing in front of Kylie's garden, now thriving with vibrant blooms and tended by volunteers inspired by her story. In the corner of the garden stood a plaque engraved with Kylie's favorite quote: "Love isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about being there. It's about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier." Visitors often paused to read it, finding comfort in its timeless wisdom. Though Louis had long since moved on from the studio apartment in Queens, the mirror remained a constant presence in his life, eventually finding its way back to the memorial wing. There, it continued to serve as a symbol of truth, reflection, and transformation, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to change. And so, Kylie's legacy lived on, not just in the programs she inspired or the lives she touched, but in the hearts of everyone who dared to look in the mirror and see themselves not as they were, but as they could be. Stories like this remind us of the power of love, accountability, and redemption. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect on life's deeper truths, please *** subscribe to our channel *** and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thought-provoking tale. Every story we share is crafted to inspire, challenge, and connect with you. So don't wait. Join our growing community today. Who knows? The next video might be exactly what you need to hear. Gentle music plays as the camera pans over Kylie's garden, now blooming under Louis' care. A single rose blooms in the foreground while the mirror sits subtly in the background. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. We hope it leaves a lasting impression and inspires you to see yourself and others with greater compassion. Until next time, take care, stay inspired, and remember, every reflection tells a story. Goodbye for now. See you again soon.